Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this this webinar in OECD Youth Week from the Education Directorate. We're very pleased to be part of Youth Week. I think it's a great initiative, it's an important initiative, and we have 45 minutes where we're going to share with you some of the findings from our ongoing work about what schools can do to best prepare young people for their working lives. We are hoping that you will all be able to sort of contribute to the chat, maybe ask some questions. We don't know how much time we're going to have, 4 questions at the end, but if we can, it'd be great to hear some responses and hear some perspectives from you all. John, my colleague, is going to be sharing with you various links for resources which you may find useful. Our subject today is the things which schools do to actually help young people get a job. And so here we're not interested in career exploration or work placement. We're interested in the knotty skills. Can you do a cover letter? Can you complete an application? Do you know how to interview well? And we've been finding some really interesting results about these activities, which many schools do to help young people in their preparation for work. I am joined today by Lynn Proctor. Lynn is a kind of a long-standing career practitioner as well. Lynn, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and your background?
Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, I have been working in schools now for the last 14 years, a range of different schools, non-selective schools, grammar schools, but with a lot of disadvantaged young people who perhaps don't have the support from home to help them be successful when they leave school. Prior to that, I worked for a long time in marketing and business.
Excellent, thanks, Lynn. And so Lynn's based in the UK. I'm just going to share perspectives from that country. And I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to sort of run through a pretty brief sort of presentation where I'm going to a few things. Firstly, here's the kind of the formal introduction. Here's our details. If you're interested in what we're talking about, you'll find lots more information on this website here, OECD Career Readiness. You can subscribe to a free monthly newsletter if you so wish. You can find out all the results from our work. And let me give you a brief overview before we really get started about what the structure is. I'm going to tell you about the project. I'm going to tell you about the long-term impacts we've found linked to these recruitment skills. I'm going to talk to you about an action research study, also in the UK, which explored more effective practice, because this is an area that's actually very under-researched. There's not a lot of good research in it about which we know about how schools can make their interview workshops, their CV practice, their application workshops as effective as possible. And then we're going to bring Lynn in particularly to share a case study of something she does every year with her students who are like 17 years old. And she's found that that's been really effective in helping them sort of like prepare for the last couple of years in education. So I head the OECD Career Readiness team. What we do is try and work out how schools can best prepare young people to have good transitions into the labour market. And we're going to know generally that across the world, young people never been more educated, never left education with more qualifications. We actually also know they're more ambitious than ever before, but we find that they're really still struggling to find good work. And in periods like them we're currently in economic turbulence, we find that young people often find it very difficult to break into work. And it's quite simple, really, why they're at such a disadvantage. They have less workplace experience to offer to employers, they have few useful contacts, less know-how about how the labour market works. And schools use career guidance, to help students prepare for the labour market. But it's been difficult often to work out what really works, what really makes a difference, because we really have to look at what happens to young people when they're 14, 15, 16, and then what happens maybe 5 years later or 10 years later. Does it really make a difference? And, historically, there's not been a lot of studies which actually looked into this, but over the last year in a project which has been supported by the JP Morgan Foundation, we've been able to look at data sets from 10 countries. And these are longitudinal studies. So they take a big cohort of children, young people, sometimes 10,000 or more. And then they ask them lots of questions. They ask the parents lots of questions. They ask the teachers lots of questions. And they build up a profile of them. And then they look what happens to them over their lives. And using this longitudinal methodology, it's possible, if you use regression analysis, to control for the sorts of things which typically determine who does well or better in the labour market. You can control for their qualifications, you can control for their social background, gender, ethnicity, and so on. And then you can try and isolate particular aspects of their teenage lives to see, did these really make a difference? And we do this by kind of testing in kind of 3 areas. We look, are their unemployment rates lower than we would expect? So this is what we call NEAT, not in education, employment or training, effectively unemployment. Are they earning more wages, higher wages than we would expect? And importantly, are they happier? Are they more satisfied with the way that their career is going? And that's really important because we know it's very stressful for young people in these early years in the labour market. We've published quite a bit already, and you can go to the OECD Career Readiness kind of website to find them. And next month, we're going to be completing our final results, publishing them, including tools for schools and for education systems. And you should if you're interested, do register as soon as possible because there are only limited places. But it's free. It's at the end of October, and I'll give you details at the very end. Now, I'm going to cut to the chase here. This is the key thing. You're getting a sneak preview of our results, and so let me talk you through this chart, this table which you see before you. Now, we've been able to look in 4 countries. In 4 countries, we have longitudinal surveys which ask students, have you been taught how to apply for a job? Have you been taught how to write a CV or prepare for an interview? These sorts of questions here. Now, we have many countries where they don't ask these questions, but we have 4 which do. And we didn't know what to expect, but we kind of found that when we looked at, across our surveys, and you'll see here, this is the initials for the survey, and the ages, which are involved. We first asked them questions, these questions here at 15 or at 16 or at 14, and then 10 or 15 years later, we look to see if there is a connection, an outcome. And we kind of find here that, well, across our 3 different indicators, our outcome areas, we find that we have quite a lot of results which are kind of very positive. We find that evidence of greater career satisfaction, of higher earnings, of lower levels of unemployment. Here we have up to the age of 26, young people who said they've been helped to write a job application, experience less unemployment over the years up to 26 than their peers. And in all 4 countries, we found something significant. I should point out that in one of our countries, in Germany, it was only young women. So for young men, we didn't find a significant relationship. And that means that by significant, we means that we're 90% sure that there is a positive association, between the activity which they did as teenagers and the outcome later on. And so with all our controls in place, we kind of find these results, which tell us actually, well, this looks like something schools really should be doing. And if we look across kind of the OECD countries, we kind of find that, we have this question in one of our PISA surveys. PISA is what we ask young people every 3 years, hundreds of thousands of young people across the world. Some countries opted into a particular survey within PISA, which asks questions about, do you know how to write a resume or a summary of your qualifications? And we kind of find that across the OECD, about 70% of young people say yes, they do. We don't know, how confident they should be. We don't know if, what the quality is. We don't know if they've done it in school or out of school. But we find that, kind of in many countries by age of 15, and you recall from here that it's at 15, we're finding that these are positive indicators of better employment outcomes later on. By 15, in many countries, about half or 2/3 of students have. Now, so that's good, but our evidence would suggest that it should really be more. It should really be nearly all students should be able to say that by this age. And then look at a job interview. Well, our figures are slightly less here. Kind of our OECD average we've got here is in the kind of the mid-50s, low 60s. And we find many young people say they do know how to prepare for a job interview, but again, we don't know if that's confidence is well placed or not. And so we have here some new evidence from the OECD about the importance of these interventions at school age. And we can see that across a good selection of countries, there's quite a bit of variation in the extent to which young people say they're able to do it. Now, I'm going to keep going because we don't have long, and I want to share with you findings from an action research project which took place in the UK about 3 or 4 years ago. Now, as I said, there's not a lot of research has been done on either long-term impacts linked to school age interview workshops or CV workshops, recruitment skills workshops, or what the characteristics of more effective provision is. And so this is one thing which does exist, and I think it's useful to share because my first point really is that our evidence suggests it's something that schools and education systems should be looking at seriously. But then, how do you do it? How do you do it well? Well, so this is one study, and you'll see it's relatively small, but it's useful in that it triangulates. It takes the opinions of the young people who took part in events, the employee volunteers and teaching staff who worked with them, but also surveyed experienced guidance practitioners. And across these different areas, this is what they had to say. They found that CV workshops, particularly practice interview sessions, were more effective when students had prepared in advance, where students felt that they were authentic. And this means involving employer and employee volunteer, somebody who actually recruits. So students can see for themselves and hear for themselves what somebody who actually does recruit and knows how employers respond to applications can provide advice. And it makes it more real and it's more serious for the student rather than student with the teacher. Interaction. We found that mock interviews where they're done as one-to-one practice interviews are more effective than being a passive talk or passive presentation where they just sit and listen. We found too that feedback was important, variation was important. It was quite important really that the students reported that they wanted to have kind of more than one of these interviews and have a mock interview in different occupational areas. And I think a lot of children, a lot of young people will leave education. Maybe the first time they actually have an interview will be for real. And they need to be effective. And maybe just doing one is of limited use, but maybe there's something we can, Lynn, I'd like to bring you in on in a moment about the benefits of doing multiple activities to be able to gain sort of confidence and experience. And finally, age. And this is something that's tricky. So our evidence here, the new evidence we have from these longitudinal data sets is aimed around 14, 15, 16. And the response from kind of practitioners and school teaching staff was that from about the age of 14, 15 upwards, were most effective. So I just want to kind of pause there. I'm going to sort of stop sharing my screen for a moment, and then bring sort of like Lynn in to firstly ask for a reaction. Kind of from the findings which we've identified in these different countries, and what's seen as being more effective practice in the study which I just presented.
Okay, I think there's a number of things there, Anthony. I think the authentic voice is really, really important for young people. Preparation, I can't stress that enough, but also it's about reflection afterwards. So I always think these employer events that we do, I kind of liken to a sandwich. So you have to have the preparation as the bread on one side, the reflections, the bread on the other side, and then the actual activity is the sandwich filling in the middle. And without that, those structures on either side, I think it has limited value to young people. I think it's important when you do these things to work out why you're doing them. Are you doing them because you really want to make a difference to young people, or are you doing them just because it's a tick box exercise and you just think you need to do it and you're just going to get a few people in to run some mock interviews with some students and then hope it'll all go well? That, in my experience, hasn't worked well. What we've done is we've looked at the mock interviews as an opportunity also to provide young people with those those contacts actually, which a lot of them don't have. So we spend a lot of time matching the young person to somebody, a volunteer who will, as Anthony have said, had an experience in recruiting themselves, but actually works in the type of career field that that young person potentially is interested in. So there's a double whammy there. First of all, they get this mock interview, but secondly, they have an opportunity to really see and talk to that person about what they do and perhaps the routes to following a career in that field. All of the students I've ever worked with have never wanted to do it. All of the students I've ever worked with have been so pleased they did it afterwards and came back with a huge amount of confidence. I think the thing that they learn most is the importance of skills. It's not the academic qualifications. They know all about that, whether they're good, bad, indifferent. It's they don't understand the skills that they're developing either in school in lessons or outside of school in their community or their sports clubs that employers are looking for. And I think sometimes the confidence that comes from, tell me a time when you played in a team, and young people will say, well, does a football team count, miss? And you'll go, of course it does. And I think for young people who haven't had a job, as Anthony said, if finding those skills and understanding those employability skills is really, really important. And often those mock interviews can help them do that.
Excellent. And do you want to say a bit more about, you're telling me that, over, pretty much every year for the last few years, you've kind of run an event. And so this is aimed at young people who are 16 to 17.
Yeah.
You arrange for them to have a mock interview, but you don't do it in the school. I think a lot of interviews are done in school. I guess logistically, it's a lot easier. But what you do is you actually send them out to the workplaces where you've identified volunteers who are willing to sort of welcome them in and actually sit them down, look at a CV. So do you want to tell me a bit about a bit more about how it all works and why you do it? Why you do the easy bit, just having them in the school?
So pre-COVID, obviously this year we didn't do it like that, but pre-COVID we thought it was we do have some in school for the more vulnerable kids who we know perhaps won't get on a bus or a train, but fundamentally they need to be outside of their comfort zone. And if you do it in school, they're not really outside of their comfort zone. They haven't done so it's often the little things that really we're talking about here, making a difference to young people. It's actually, can they get to a place that they've never been to before? When I worked in a school in South London, I had students who had never caught the train at the end of the road where the school was and gone 2 stops up into central London, literally never had done that. So what you're also doing is trying to get them to sort of experience a wider world, literally. So take them outside of their comfort zone. They've got to go into an office. They've actually got to, announce themselves at reception, all of the kind of things that you would have to do in a real situation. And I think the other thing about it is that if you do a set of interviews in school, generally you do them in the hall, you're all sitting together with tables nearby. There isn't a lot of privacy and kids can sort of play up when their friends are next door. They might giggle a bit, they might be a bit silly, they might not take it as seriously as they ought to. So I think that those 2 elements are really very important to me. This year we couldn't do it in person, but we did it on Zoom and the children did it from home. So again, they had that element of privacy. And actually, I think what COVID has taught us is an awful lot of employers now, as well as universities. I mean, the top universities in the UK are now interviewing still this year again by Zoom, that actually young people need to understand all of the intricacies of being successful on a Zoom interview. So that is going to be the way forward initially, perhaps for initial interviews. So all of that makes it much more real. And the feedback that they get can be about, not just about whether they've got shiny shoes, but actually, how they looked on their camera. Are they looking at the camera properly, or they're not, they're not sort of doing other things. So all of those things make it really authentic and real, and I think more useful for the young person actually.
And just firstly, let me just I see quite a few people have joined a bit late because another session ran over. So in a moment, I'll put the slides back up. And maybe we'll talk through a couple of the results and just to get people back up to speed. But firstly, can you tell me a bit about the preparation? Just how much preparation is involved?
Right. So first of all, the preparation that we would do is we would do a CV workshop where the young people would do their CV. We also incorporate updating their LinkedIn profile, because so many jobs now are actually advertised on LinkedIn. So it's really important that they have that. So that's sort of stage one. So they've actually got something of some merit to send to the volunteers that we have used, professional volunteers. We then would do a session on what a good interview looks like. So the things that you need to think about. Again, you're trying to level the playing field. You're not just, you're not just sending them out there randomly, and those who have got parents who can tell them how to be good an interview are going to do much better than those that haven't. So you're telling them what's expected, whether that's in person or whether that's what a good Zoom interview might look like. So that, again, you're giving them all of those tools to be successful. We do that through workshops. We also do that through form time as a reminder. So then they actually have the event, they feel as prepared as we can make it, to help their, to make them feel more confident and actually make it more useful for them, really. So I think that's really important. And then afterwards, I can't stress the importance of reflecting on how it went. How do they follow up with the interviewer? Did they go back to them? I mean, I've had students who followed up, then have got work experience on the back of it, who've had placements on the back of it. But just that whole process of following up and what did they learn and what would they do differently next time, your point about having more than one. So I think all of those things, it's really important to put the effort in. I mean, we wouldn't do anything else without preparation. I'm not sure quite why we think with careers related events we don't have to do any preparation or reflection. We do that in every other aspect of school life, really.
Yeah. And do you require every student in that year group to undertake the interview?
Yeah, I really do. And yes, we might have some children who are on the special needs on the SEN register, and we will be thoughtful about that. We'll be thoughtful about the volunteers that we use to interview those young people. We'll be thoughtful about maybe doing those in school, actually, because they might need more steps on their ladder than somebody else. So we would be thoughtful about not making it too big a jump for children perhaps who have additional needs. All of them.
And I mean, it's always a key question, I think, in guidance about whether something is mandatory or voluntary. And why is it that you've decided to make this mandatory?
Because the children who probably need it the most will be the kids that will opt out. Anyone who does my role will know that kids will try and vie away from something that looks too difficult or something that they haven't done before. So they won't want to go be part of a presentation skills workshop, for example, because they don't like standing up in front of people and talking. So you really do have to encourage them, and because otherwise you're not really doing them a service. I mean, any of us as parents know that tough love sometimes, and as I said to you, they all are really scared about going, and almost to a student they are so pleased that they have gone, and those volunteers are just really good at giving them really positive feedback. It's a very positive experience, actually.
I just see a question on the chat about, just to clarify, what age the students are. So these are
16 and 17-year-olds. I find it's more useful when they're in what would be a sixth form in the UK. They're closer to their final decisions about what they want to do when they leave school. Most of our students have to stay now in education until they're 18. So they're closer to what they might want to do, whether that's a degree apprenticeship, whether that's a job, or whether that's university. So it makes that a more meaningful experience, quite honestly. And they've got a little bit more to talk about as well.
Okay. In a moment, we'll go and put those slides up again. I'll ask you for some of your reactions as a practitioner about how we can make sense of these results which we're finding. But let me just ask you before then, can you talk a bit about the process of finding the volunteers? I imagine you've got a lot of kids, a lot of young people who need an interview. And you try, as you said, to find people who work in areas which the kids themselves are interested in, which makes it even more difficult. How do you find them?
So, I've got a big black book. No, I mean, it just takes time. I mean, most people that do my kind of role will have lots of contacts with businesses. Lots of businesses have other contacts with other businesses. Parents are a useful source in some environments. In some schools I've worked in, they've been great. In other schools, not so engaged, but that's a good point of discussion. I also ask staff members, because the teaching staff have people that work, friends, family, who also work in employment. Obviously the contacts that I have. And we can make the most of social media. You know, LinkedIn's great if you go on and say, look, I'm trying to do these mock interviews. I haven't got anyone who's a graphic designer. Would anybody fancy doing that? That's surprising how much pickup you can get from that. I would say that if you have really, you have to take care of your volunteers. You really have to brief them. You have to tell them, you know, so there's a lot of effort and preparation that goes into the volunteers as well, keeping them in the loop, telling them what you're doing, you know, explaining the process. You know, you can't just sort of give them a CV of a kid and then hope that it'll all go fine, even if they are very good at interviewing and that's part of their job role. So I think there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it to make it successful. It doesn't just happen overnight. And if you have good volunteers, treat them well. And if you don't have lots of volunteers, then don't be so ambitious. Don't do the whole year group in a day that we've done. Take it in bite-sized pieces and maybe use those same volunteers more than once and do it different weeks at different times. You don't have to do it all at one time.
Okay. I mean, that seems really good advice to me. Let me put our figures up, and you know, partly for the benefit of people who are just joining, but also because I'd really like to get your kind of reaction. And I think what's be really helpful, maybe if we could spend a bit of time thinking about what we think is happening here. And so here, you know, just to recap, you know, in this new work which we're doing in the Career Readiness Project, we'll be looking at 10 longitudinal data sets, longitudinal data sets from 10 countries. 4 of them have questions in which we asked of 14, 15, 16-year-olds about whether they've been helped to learn how to prepare for applying for jobs, writing a CV, you know, practicing interview, and so on. And we find that in 3 of them, you know, for all young people, we find benefits, whether it's about greater career satisfaction or lower unemployment or higher earnings. And in the 4th, in Germany, for young women. We don't find it for young men, but we find it for young women, you know, which is still half the population. We also find about, you know, kind of these benefits. And Lynn, you know, can I ask you for a perspective? You know, what do you think is happening here? You know, are they, you know, simply sort of like, you know, learning a skill, or is something, you know, perhaps more psychological happening to them when they, you know, they're presented with, I suppose this moment, this perhaps this, you know, this little kind of moment of truth where they present themselves to somebody in the labour market and says, you know, what sort of job might I be able to get with, you know, with these sorts of qualifications? Would I be a candidate? So what do you think happens? What do you think explains the differences which we're seeing here?
Oh, what a difficult question, Anthony. I think for young people today, that the sort of what should I do is really, really complicated for them, but it isn't complicated really. I think what you're trying to do in all of these things is provide stepping stones and work out where they are and how big a stepping stone. The more things that they do, the bigger that stepping stone becomes, the more options that they have. So I think the more things that you do that expose them to the authentic world beyond school, the more confidence they have in their own ability to be successful, and actually the confidence they have to maybe look beyond their narrow perceptions of what might work for them, whether that's too high a perception, whether that's too low a perception, whether that's too narrow a perception, just not broad enough. I think all of those things, when you start to meet people from outside, are really helpful. And I think the other thing that I've found too, particularly with perhaps students who are less motivated, perhaps not as well behaved in school, when they meet somebody from outside school who doesn't know any of that, they have a chance to reinvent themselves. And it's astonishing actually how that can be a really powerful tool. They went to meet Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones thought I was amazing. That's perhaps the first time anyone's thought I was amazing, because he saw all the other things that I've been doing, and no one had really thought that was very important that I picked my brother up from school every Wednesday, but he thought that was really important, and that showed this, that, and the other. All of those things are really simple, and we understand that, but young people don't.
Yeah, that must be very.
Is that an answer? I don't know if that's an answer really, but anyway.
Well, you know, I mean, effectively in many education systems, what we find is that, you know, as young people stay in education for longer, they're expected to, you know, kind of show a high degree of agency, you know, making choices. And some of these choices are about narrowing down the things which they study. Sometimes it's about changing institution. It might be going onto a training program, apprenticeship program, or staying in education. lots of choices to be made, including actually just how hard you have to work at different subjects. Do you need a B in your maths or a grade 2 in your maths to be able to go this way? And so young people are required, to go through the education system, compiling eventually a profile of qualifications, skills, experiences, which they're going to hope to sell in the labour market. Somebody give them money in exchange for, who they are, who they present themselves as. But we don't always give young people the tools in order to be able to do that. We don't give them the resources to allow, I suppose, the development of the self-knowledge, which you're talking about. That this sort of thing actually is really important. That I pick up my, my kid sister, and that shows responsibility and trust and so on. But also, that process of continually sort of like connecting, who you are within the education system, how you're going to invest in the education system, and how that might relate to an imagined, future in work, allow you to visualize and plan that future better. And I think what we're finding, and we'll present this in October, is that the more that young people are actively exploring their futures in work, the more that they're having direct experience of workplaces, we find that more, I suppose, the more mature, their career thinking is. They're more likely to have an aspiration for a career which is actually aligned with the sorts of education they expect to get. They're more likely to be able to see a connection between the education they're doing and its value later on in work. We a bit earlier we looked at some of the tips from this this action research project, and you picked up a few of the things there. Authenticity is something which you mentioned, and something which I think is really important. It shows that an awful lot can be done in the classroom, but there's something which is extra, which you get from putting them out into the real world. Variation, volume, these are things which perhaps are more difficult to engineer. But I think you made a really good point earlier, which was privacy. The importance of privacy for allowing these interviews, and certainly I've seen them in big school halls where everybody's talking, and some of the kids are mucking about a little bit, and they feel shy, and it doesn't really give them the experience which we need. And so there clearly is, it seems, from this project and from your experience, quite a lot which can be done to either make these processes more effective or they might become less effective. And earlier you shared with me, kind of some of your tips, which maybe we might just summarize now. And then we're coming to a bit towards the end of us talking, but we're going to have about 10 minutes or so to respond to sort of any questions. So my colleague John is kind of working on the chat, and perhaps John, you might come in a moment and share with us some of the questions which have been coming up there, observations. But Lynn, do you want to just talk through a little bit about your takeaways? For if somebody's working in schools or has responsibilities related to schools and thinks this is something which we should do, and we're talking kind of more narrowly about mock interviews here, practice interviews. What are the things which you want them to take away from your experience?
I think do it well. So if you can't do it big, then do it small and do it well. That's really important. Be thoughtful. If you can't do it for the whole year group, be thoughtful about who's going to make the most difference to. So if you've got disadvantaged students who are not going to get that support from home, maybe the language that's spoken at home is not the home language of the country that you're in. So that's another thing to bear in mind. So I think that's really important. Obviously for students perhaps who are needing an interview in order to get to the next stage of wherever they're going. So in the UK, those students who are looking not to go to university, but looking for an apprenticeship or degree apprenticeship often do not get the support in school to help them with that application process, which will include an interview. And they need that support greatly because other students will be going to university and will get all that when they're at university. So you might be thoughtful about who you provide that for originally. But I always put a proviso on that, is that if you do any kind of career event that seems to focus on the free school meals type children, the children who are really disadvantaged, it loses its value. You need to make sure that the kids who have it see that this is really valuable and really important. So it's always important to make sure that you have also incorporated the sort of cool kids in the school or the very able kids, because if it's just seen as something for those that are not as clever or who are not as advantaged, it doesn't work. So you have to sort of be thoughtful about that. So I think it's, be realistic about your time, what you can, can't do. Always take feedback from your volunteers, take feedback from the students. That's really, really important. And you really do need to do all this preparation. I'll just leave you with one student that said to me after they'd had a mock interview, Miss, that person was so interested in my future that it's made me interested in my future too. And I thought, well, I can't do much better than that. Someone else believing in you means that you'll believe in yourself.
That's really powerful. Okay, so John, I'll look to you in a moment to see if there's any sort of like things which we can pick up in the last 10 minutes. While you do that, I'm just going to leave up this screen for a little while, because here you can, give you an extra prompt to sign up for our conference. Mail me if you want to join our newsletter. Follow me on Twitter, because that's where we put up a lot of our information these days. But let me stop sharing now, and we'll ask people who joined us, and thank you so much for joining us, for select comments and questions. I see one immediately, which is about from Christina, about what sort of screening or training of volunteers do you do before the mock interviews?
That's a good question, Christina. I mean, I think this. So if we're doing them in businesses, in large businesses, then there will be screening that's done there already through the systems of the people that work there. So you don't need to worry about particularly getting good checks. I think that's why we do sessions with volunteers. So if I've worked with a large organization, I've worked with big organizations who said we can provide you with 30 people, I've gone in and actually run a training session in that organization about what this should look like. We are trying to keep it as authentic as possible. So we're really just saying, give them an interview like you'd give them an interview if they were applying for a job. So, those people know what they're doing in that situation. They're just maybe talking to young people a little bit younger. It's always important to give the context of the school, what you're trying to achieve as a school, what the kind of background of the children that are coming from the school as an overall, not individually, but as an overall. So you're giving them some kind of context and how that they can make a difference and what really key points you're trying to get across, really. And that will change from institution to institution. I hope that answers.
That's a really good point, about maybe about, the virtue of lack of training. Sometimes if we train people too much, we can stop them appearing to be authentic. And that's something we've seen in many studies about career talks. Kind of when volunteers come into the classroom to talk to people about the jobs they do, young people are less likely to trust them if they don't feel that they're being authentic, or they are authentic. They'll see through it, it certainly, I suppose, makes it an easier ask of kind of volunteers as well. We've got some more sort of like kind of questions sort of coming in here. There's one which is about, how do you encourage the students to participate? I know you said you require them to do it, but are there tricks of the trade in?
Yeah, I think the thing is, this is not a one-off part. This is not one thing that we do. It's part of a whole integrated careers program, particularly for year 12, which is 16 to 17-year-olds. Career chats, online work experience now, which they also can do, real life work experience. A whole host of things that we do throughout the year, workshops on CVs, LinkedIn. So it's part of a sort of a myriad of opportunities that they're given. It's just one element of that. So yeah, I mean, I think also the other thing I would say is that whenever you do something in school, the first year that you do it is the hardest year, because you have no champions from schools, from previous pupils. Once you've done it once and the pupils go, that was amazing, and look what I got some work experience of this, I got into this university because of that, you don't have a problem, because you've built up that kind of essence of goodwill. So it's always tough the first time, and then it gets easier and easier as time goes on, because they see the benefit.
Right. And picking up another question, how do you convince the school to do this? I mean, I suppose those kids are out of school for a morning or an afternoon.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of planning. You're going to have to spend quite a few hours getting this sorted. So, do you find that, I suppose in some schools, career guidance is seen as a bit of a tick box. You know, sort of like, have you had your one interview? You know, have you been introduced to LMI? Have you, you know, maybe had a placement? And it's kind of feel tick, 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 whether you're doing something which is, you know, kind of more ambitious, more sophisticated, and I would say more aligned with what the research says is likely to work and more likely to work in schools. So how do you convince, you know, the senior management?
Okay, so I think two things here. One is it's actually very hard to conduct a really good, effective careers program if you don't have the buy-in from the senior leadership team. That makes it's a very, very difficult ask, and I really sympathise anyone who doesn't have the support of their senior leadership team. It's so much part of Wellington, what we do, and how that's, you know, embraced by all members of staff. But what I do is I do these on an inset day. So we have teacher training days in the UK where the kids don't come into school, the teachers do. I don't need teachers for this exercise. So the kids are not in school anyway, so they're not missing any lessons. So there are ways of thinking. So you could also do it maybe during a holiday, a half-term holiday or something, where you're not necessarily taking them out of lessons if that's going to be a critical part of the school, you know. And I have worked in schools where they are very nervous about taking kids out of lessons, and other schools where they're less so. So, you know, it varies.
Okay, and just tracking back one, I think maybe we just time maybe one or two sort of final questions. You know, in terms of safeguarding students, do you feel that you need to take, you know, have you know, sort of like police checks done on the volunteers, or, you know, the people in workplaces? Is that something which is a concern? You know, what's your approach to that?
So advise on that. I mean, if you look at work experience, this is in the UK, if you look at work experience, young people go to work experience either when they're 15 or when they're 17, depends on the school. And in those environments, nobody that they're working for in work experience has to have any of those particular police checks. So as long as the organisation is bona fide, and that's the key point about that, we're not sort of sending them to some little place underneath the railway arches somewhere, then, you know, and we know where they're going, their parents know where they're going. We've never had any issues whatsoever. So I think that would be this, you know, they're only going there for an hour. They might go to an organisation for 2 weeks for work experience, and still there are no DBS checks. There are insurance checks, and that the actual environment in which they're going to is safe. But in terms of the individuals, that's how it would be, and it's how it would be if they went for an interview.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I think in these webinars, what we try and do is combine some of the latest evidence, you know, which we have from around the world on what makes a difference in career guidance activities, and combine that with, you know, insight from, you know, kind of from the classroom floor, from the shop floor, you know, to be able to really make sense of, you know, what, you know, not only what is working, but why we think things are working. And I guess our kind of summary here is that, you know, in this new analysis, probably we were a bit surprised ourselves, you know, kind of to find such consistent results. But in the 4 countries where, you know, students are asked, you know, if they've been doing these activities which help them learn how to apply for jobs, interview, prepare CVs and resumes, we find in all 4 countries, most, or in Germany, you know, girls, you know, have significant, you know, better outcomes later on. And it kind of seems that in many of those countries, you know, the majority of children aren't sort of like going into education, aren't going into work, you know, the next year, or, you know, or maybe in the next 2 or 3 years. But perhaps what they're finding here is, you know, a really important opportunity for them to take stock of, you know, where they are in their education, to get an outside perspective on, you know, how the labour market really works, how it might relate to them, you know, in the profile which they're developing, you know, to confirm or to challenge some of the assumptions which they had before. And that's in our evidence is what we really want. We want young people to be reflective, critical thinkers about their futures. And I think we find is that that's probably the golden thread, you know, through the work which we're going to be presenting at the end of next month. That young people who are actively encouraging, exploring, reflecting, talking about kind of their futures, gaining new experiences, are sort of like enhancing their thinking about who they are and who they might become. And then that in turn allows them to engage in new activities, you know, more effectively, you know, because they've got sharper sense about, you know, who they are and where they want to go. We have run out of time. I am just very finally going to put my final slide up again, so that if people want to just make a note of disruptive futures, sign up now to avoid disappointment, or to learn more about this project. So please do sort of like, get involved, contact us, have a look at, the work that we've been doing. So thank you very much, everybody. I wish you all very good evenings, very good mornings, very good afternoons, wherever you are. Thanks so much, and happy OECD Youth Week to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.